They demoted me after I closed a $1.25 billion rupees deal, so I let them watch themselves fall. The envelope was already on the table when I stepped into the room. No handshake, no smile, no eye contact. Just that thin, white rectangle sitting too perfectly aligned, like someone had measured it with a ruler and proofread my name 3 times. My full name. Centered. Capitalized. Silent. Effective immediately, Robert said, not bothering to lift his head. Your title has been adjusted to strategic liaison. Compensation adjusted accordingly. That was it. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the deal I had just closed. No thank you for the years of sacrifice. No explanation for the new title I had never heard before. Just a line drawn across my professional life, and a 55% pay cut carved into the bottom. I didn't say anything. Not because I was in shock, but because something colder had already crept up the back of my neck. The kind of cold that doesn't scream. It settles. Quiet. Heavy. Final. My name is Nicole Vance. I am 38 years old. And until 6 minutes ago, I was the Senior Director of Aerospace Contracts at Holston Aerodyne. Just 7 days earlier, I finalized the largest contract in the company's history, a $1.25 billion agreement for 5 long-range jets with a European conglomerate. It took 8 months of sleepless nights, 14 international flights, and endless backdoor negotiations in 3 languages. I wrote every clause, solved every compliance obstacle. I did it alone. And now, I was being dismissed like a temp caught printing resume on company paper. I sat across from a man who couldn't even say my name out loud. A man who had once praised my attention to detail, but now couldn't meet my eyes while reducing my title to something he could explain away in a memo. I looked at the envelope, picked it up, folded it without opening, slipped it into my bag. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. Because this wasn't the time to fight. It was the time to remember. Every handshake, every silence, every name that stood in the way, and smiled anyway. They thought I would protest, that I would beg for understanding or retaliate in anger. They expected a scene. What they got was silence, because when you've already been erased, you stop asking to be seen. I walked out. The glass door to my office, the one that used to read, Nicole Vance, Senior Director, was now empty. Wiped clean. No misspelling. No replacement. Just gone. Like the 15 years I had given to Holston never happened. I stood there for a long time, not sure whether to knock or grieve. Then, an intern walked past me. She was balancing 2 trays of coffee and did a double take. Need help finding something? She asked, smiling politely, not recognizing me. I gave her a tight nod. Number, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I turned, box in hand labeled Nicole's Personal Effects in friendly HR handwriting, and headed to the elevator, 5 floors down. Past apartments I hadn't stepped into since I was a junior associate. That's where I found my new space. Not an office. A cubicle. Windowless. Phoneless. Carpeted walls. A flickering overhead light. It smelled like old toner and lemon-scented disinfectant. The desk drawer still had a tangled phone cord in it. A post-it note on the screen read, Nicole, I'll set you up by EOD, HR. No nameplate, no welcome. Just an empty corner in a forgotten corridor. I sat. The chair wobbled. Across from me, on the far wall, was the new org chart. Freshly laminated. I walked over, scanned it. My name wasn't there. Not at the top. Not in the footnotes. Not even under contributors. Lena Maxwell had taken my place. A bright, ambitious 30-something I had once mentored during her internship. She now bore the title, Director of Global Strategy Initiatives. Under her photo was a caption I hadn't approved. A bold, new vision for Holston's global future. I closed my eyes. It wasn't rage I felt. It was mourning. Mourning for the version of me that had believed this company could be home. That if I just worked harder, gave more, proved myself relentlessly, the system would eventually reward merit. They hadn't just replaced me. They had erased me. That afternoon, someone from marketing walked by with a stack of folders. "These are for tomorrow's leadership update," she said cheerily. "Could you make sure Lena gets them?" I nodded. Then I noticed one folder sticking out, a printed slide deck titled Contract Finalization, Munich Team, led by Nicole Vance. My face was there. I remembered that photo. Taken after the signing, champagne glass still in my hand. But someone had crossed it out with a red marker, a thick red X. The deck had been reprinted. Lena's name. Lena's photo. I sat back down in my cubicle and opened the cabinet drawer. Inside were the binders I had created. Notes I had written. Sections I had color-coded. Labeled. Reviewed. Rewritten. But every tab that once read NV now read LM. I had vanished. Nicole Vance was no longer a name. She was a ghost, replaced by the one I once trained. She passed by my cubicle again that morning. Lena. A new ID badge glinting under soft light, her steps so sure they sounded rehearsed. She didn't notice me at least, not on purpose. She moved the way people move when they are on the right side of power, shoulders unbothered, eyes trained forward. The portfolio in her hand matched the one I used to carry to board meetings. Except mine was worn in at the edges, leather darkened by years of flight, sweat, and quiet tension. Hers still smelled like packaging. She didn't invent the job. She inherited the title. 2 years ago, I remember sitting across from her in a glass-walled interview room, reviewing her internship application. Fresh from business school. Bright eyes. A curated blend of humility and self-assurance. She had read the right books, followed the right people on LinkedIn. I had given her her first real project, a minor clause revision in a supplier compliance document. She struggled with it, called it confusing. I walked her through the structure of European aerospace procurement. Twice. She thanked me. Eager, wide-eyed, respectful. Now she was walking through the halls of Holston, with the title Director of Global Strategy Initiatives, a position that didn't exist until I was removed, until they needed a name to fill the void I left. And they chose hers. There's something that happens when the person replacing you is someone you trained. The betrayal is layered. It's not just loss, it's transference. They didn't just strip my name from the project. I watched them graft hers onto it, while the ink on my final draft was still drying. By midweek, the transformation was complete. My inbox began to shift subtle at first. Internal messages marked CC instead of to. Meeting invites forwarded for visibility. Documents I authored now returned to me with track changes and comments from Lena like, just adding a more forward-leaning frame to this section. She was rewriting what I had written with my whole body, like it was just content. On Thursday, I was asked to deliver updated presentation folders to Lena's assistant. One folder stuck out poorly stapled, one page sliding loose. I caught a glimpse of a slide deck titled Contract Finalization, Munich Team, led by Nicole Vance. My photo was still there. It was taken after the signing ceremony. My smile was tired, but proud. I remembered the weight of that moment, 8 months of negotiation distilled into one photograph. But someone had taken a red marker and slashed a bold X across my face. It wasn't digital. It wasn't subtle. It was ink. Intentional. And in the final printed version, Lena's name had replaced mine. They didn't even hide it. Erasure is often dressed in subtlety HR jargon, strategy memos, reorganization charts. But this wasn't subtle. This was loud. This was someone standing over a printer with a marker and deciding to bury me visibly. I returned to my cubicle and opened the file drawer beneath the desk. Inside were the binders I had built, each one labeled, sectioned, color-coded. I had touched every part of that contract. Revised clauses at 2-inch the morning, negotiated over video calls from layover lounges and dim hotel rooms, annotated supplier risks in the margins of my own travel itineraries. But now, every tab that once read NV had been relabeled LM. It wasn't accidental, it wasn't routine, it was systematic. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being repositioned, as if I had never held the role at all. That's when I realized the depth of what was happening. This wasn't about performance. It was about positioning. They wanted someone they could shape, someone they could claim, someone new enough to believe the title was a gift, not a cage. And Lena fit the mold perfectly. Young, presentable, not burdened by the history of the deal or the scars that came with it. She could walk into rooms I had already carved paths through and pretend she was charting new ground. What she didn't know was that some walls don't move just because you wear the badge. Some doors don't open without trust, and trust can't be inherited. It has to be earned. But Holston didn't care about trust. They cared about optics. They wanted someone whose ascent looked clean, whose file didn't carry too much memory, someone who hadn't already outgrown the ceilings. I had done the work. She was just the placeholder they hoped would make everyone forget. And in the echo of that truth, something shifted in me. I stopped trying to hold on to what had been stolen, and I began thinking, quietly, about what they hadn't seen, what they had missed, what they never bothered to understand. The quiet reclamation. I didn't fight back. Not the way they expected. There were no angry emails, no HR complaints, no fiery monologues in conference rooms. That's not how you win against a system that was built to ignore your voice. Instead, I sat still, and I listened. To the silence, to the rhythm of the office that no longer looked up when I walked by, to the echo of my own name disappearing from agendas I used to lead. I let it all play out unbothered on the surface, but alert underneath. Because somewhere, in the rubble they left behind, I still had one thing they had overlooked. One clause. Clause 47. B. I had inserted it late quietly, during the final phase of the contract in Munich. It wasn't standard. Legal never saw it. It wasn't buried. It was simply ignored. Written in plain language, operational oversight shall remain under Nicole Vance. In the event of reassignment, client may void this agreement. No legal jargon, no loopholes. Just a line of trust, signed by a client who had looked me in the eye and said, "If you disappear, the deal disappears too." At the time, it felt like a safeguard. Now, it felt like a loaded trigger waiting to be pulled. So I waited. I pulled out the original hard copy from the drawer, my signature still visible, the ink a little smudged from that night in Munich, when my hands were shaking from exhaustion. I remembered the dinner with the client's COO, the one where he leaned in over a glass of red wine and said, "We've been burned before, we need assurance." And I had given it, quietly, with my pen, not my voice. Back in that cubicle, I reread that clause a dozen times. And with each pass, a strange calm settled over me. They thought they had taken the deal from me, but I never gave it away. I was the architect. They had taken the shell, the shape, the public-facing structure, but the foundation, they hadn't even known where to look. And it was still mine. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I started small. I sent a few emails. Not to complain, not to warn, just to check in with people who had worked with me across continents, procurement officers, legal liaisons, engineers I had flown beside on red-eyes, former executives who now led teams at rival firms. Nothing direct, nothing desperate, just questions. If someone with deep compliance experience became available in Q4, would you be open to a conversation? Are you still overseeing the European integration side? How's the morale over there these days? I wasn't planting seeds. I was checking the soil, and it was fertile. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, area code 202 Washington, D.C. I picked up, expecting a spam survey. Instead, I heard a woman's voice, steady, calm, precise. "Nicole Vance?" she asked. "Yes. My name is Allison Kerr. I'm an independent contract law attorney. I've just reviewed the Eurova-Holston agreement, and I believe you're the author of Clause 47B? I paused. My fingers tightened around the phone. "I am." She exhaled lightly, like someone had just shown her the final move in a chess game. "It's airtight," she said. "Simple language, direct intent, enforceable in every jurisdiction this deal touches." My throat tightened. Not with fear, with clarity. "They have no idea," she added. "They're blind to it. That clause is the smartest part of the entire agreement, and they've walked right past it." I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. For the first time in weeks, I felt gravity shift back into my hands. That night, I stayed late at the office, not working, just watching. Lena left early. Robert's door stayed closed. I sat beneath the hum of the overhead light and watched the building breathe around me, unaware it was standing on a foundation they no longer controlled. The contract was mine. The power was mine. And the silence? It was no longer exile. It was strategy. The day the deal died. Monday morning arrived with an eerie calm. The office hummed like always, printers sputtering, heels clicking, coffee being poured with that false urgency only corporate life demands. No one expected me to show up. Not after the demotion. Not after the silent exile. Most would have disappeared or burned out in rage. But I showed up anyway. Blazer pressed. Hair pulled back. Eyes sharp. Quiet. I walked past Robert's office. His door was half closed. As I passed, he glanced up briefly, met my eyes for less than a second, and looked away like I was just another calendar notification he had missed. I gave him nothing. Not a smile. Not a nod. Not a flicker of recognition. Across the floor, Lena was already moving her stride fast, deliberate. She had a boarding pass sticking out of her portfolio and a Holston-issued briefcase I recognized. I had picked it out 3 years ago when we launched the Tokyo initiative. Now it was hers. She was heading to Toulouse, Eurava's headquarters. She left that morning through the Dulles executive terminal strutting, smiling, fully dressed in the borrowed skin of someone else's work. I didn't stop her. I didn't warn her, because the contract was already sealed, and the time for warnings had passed. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Clause 47B wasn't just ink on a page. It was steel, the kind that snaps shut when underestimated. At 4:30 p.m., the building went quiet. An email had hit inboxes across the executive floor. Short. Brutal. Cold. Subject: Clause 47B, Notice of Breach. From Eurava Legal Department to Holston Executive Group. Per Clause 47B of the signed agreement, post-deal implementation must be led by Miss Nicole Vance. We do not recognize substitutes. All meetings are hereby suspended. Any breach of this clause renders the contract void. No pleasantries. No negotiations. Just closure. They had made the fatal mistake of sending Lena in my place. Now, a $1.25 billion deal was suspended mid-transfer. The jet delivery schedule frozen. Supply chain halted. Client confidence shattered. And none of them, not one, had thought to ask if Clause 47B mattered. I found out about the message from a junior analyst. He passed my cubicle wide-eyed, his expression somewhere between awe and panic. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. By 5 p.m., the panic had fully spread. Slack threads burst open with urgent tags. Executives gathered behind glass-walled offices, whispering, sweating. Someone from PR tried to spin the breach into a strategic restructuring blip, but the draft was deleted an hour later. Rumor had it Robert ordered the entire conversation scrubbed from internal systems. But it was too late. The silence I had been shoved into had become the loudest thing in the building. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand credit. I simply existed, unshaken, still here, and suddenly unignorable. The next morning, no one looked me in the eye. Lena didn't return to the office. Robert didn't call a meeting. Someone said she cried in the executive bathroom. Maybe that was true. Maybe not. It didn't matter. I wasn't interested in their emotions. I was watching the system fold in on itself. I had written that clause in stillness. Now I was watching it do what I had designed it to do, hold power accountable. By 9 a.m., the top floor vibrated with urgency. Phones rang off the hook. Legal was locked in rooms. PR had 3 press statements on standby, none of which ever saw daylight. Downstairs, I sat calmly typing reports no one would read. I didn't need a calendar invite to know the board was meeting without coffee breaks. I didn't need to be in the room to feel my absence circling like a ghost they couldn't shake. Someone from finance walked by and muttered, "Jesus." She really wrote it in. Yes, I did. Clause 47B wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror. And now they were all standing in front of it, facing the reflection of what they had chosen to ignore. By early afternoon, the final blow arrived. Subject: contract status. Formal termination. From Jurava. Legal. To Holston Board. PR. Investors. Due to personnel reassignment in violation of Clause 47B, this agreement is considered null and void. All obligations dissolved effective immediately. Every thread unraveled at once. The aircraft production line was halted. Shareholders demanded explanation. Avenex, the competitor Holston once mocked, was now circling for opportunity. But I didn't move. I sat in the same cubicle they had assigned me. And I let them feel what they had created, the vacuum that forms when the only person who held the weight walks away in silence. That was the day Holston realized what they had lost. Not just a signature, not just a strategist, but the one person who knew how to hold the system together from the inside, and they would never get that back. The invitation. The call came at 9:15 a.m. on a Wednesday. I was refilling my coffee. Same chipped mug. Same quiet corner of a building, now pulsing with crisis. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, New York area code. I almost let it go, but something told me to answer. Nicole Vance? The voice was smooth, controlled. Familiar in the way powerful people often are when they speak softly but carry decisions. Yes, I said. This is Jonah Patel. We spoke a few months ago. I believe the timing wasn't quite right then. I paused, letting the words settle. I remember. Jonah was the CEO of Avenex, the same competitor who had approached me 3 months ago with an offer I had turned down out of loyalty to Holston. Back then, I told him I still believed in the company I helped build. Now, I knew better. I'm hoping the timing feels different today, he continued. I'd like to revisit our offer, with a few upgrades. I walked slowly back to my desk. The paper cup in my hand was already forgotten. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't quicken. I was past that. This wasn't adrenaline. It was authority. Jonah didn't hesitate. He laid out the terms with the calm of someone who had already run the numbers. Double base salary, equity stake, full relocation support, a private team, a dedicated floor in their new DC headquarters. And then he said it. One more thing. This wasn't just our idea. We were strongly encouraged to reach back out. By who? I asked. There was a pause. Not long, just enough to be intentional. By Mail Berenger, Jurava's CEO. The man who had once slid a handwritten note under my hotel room door after a long negotiation in Munich. The man who looked me in the eye and said, "We're not signing with Holston. We're signing with you." I had kept that note, tucked behind business cards and boarding passes, folded like a secret contract between those who know real work when they see it. He called you a non-negotiable asset, Jonah said. Said the deal collapsed because you weren't in it, and he doesn't want the next one unless you are. For a moment, I said nothing. I sat back in the flimsy chair Holston had demoted me into. My eyes drifted to the chipped edge of the cubicle wall. I remembered what it felt like to be erased. To be told without words that your worth ends where someone else's comfort begins. And now, I was the name they couldn't move forward without. Jonah, I said carefully. Before we talk numbers again, I have a condition. Of course, he replied quickly. I choose my team. I approve every hire under my division, especially post-deal integration. No exceptions. Another pause. Done, he said. No hesitation. One more thing. One. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the envelope. The note from Munich. The one that had carried me through these weeks like a whispered vow. I don't just want to oversee deals, I said. I want full life cycle authority, from negotiation to implementation to renewal. You'll have it, Jonah answered. I didn't say yes. Not yet. But I didn't say no. After we hung up, I placed my phone face down and stared out the window. Holston's headquarters towered just a few blocks away, glass and steel, polished, impenetrable. But I knew what was inside. Fear, confusion, silence. They had tried to trap me inside a system they thought I needed. Instead, I had built the exit strategy. Now I wasn't asking to return. I was being invited to lead. The deal wasn't revenge. It wasn't compensation. It was reclamation. When the final contract came through, I saw it clearly. Total deal value: 1,125 billion. Client: Eurova Aerospace. Vendor: Avenex Global. Oversight Executive: Nicole Vance. And beneath it, a clause written in bold black font: all operations, reporting, and implementation oversight shall remain under direct authority of Nicole Vance. Substitution is not permitted. There would be no repeats, no replacements, no rewriting. They weren't taking chances anymore, and neither was I. The name they couldn't replace. The press release went live at 10:30 a.m. full-color banner on Avenex's homepage. By noon, Bloomberg and Reuters had picked it up. Avenex secures landmark jet contract with Eurova. Former Holston executive leads new era of aerospace strategy. I didn't check Holston's response. I didn't need to. But according to a quiet message from someone still inside, Lena saw the article on LinkedIn during a leadership huddle. She froze mid-sentence. Robert read it an hour later. Alone. In his glass office. The same office where he once stripped me of my title, without ever saying my name. This time, he didn't say anything either. There were no calls from them. No emails. No congratulations or polite attempts to reclaim civility. And I was glad. Because I didn't want their acknowledgement. I had the proof. In headlines. In ink. In silence. That afternoon, I took the elevator up to the top floor of Avenex's new DC headquarters. Marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Track lighting so soft it felt like ceremony. I walked past a lounge where muted news played across a wall-mounted screen. The headline rolled beneath the ticker. Holston announces 200 job cuts amid failed deal fallout. CEO, Robert Holston exits company. I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. I felt release. They had tried to reduce me to silence. But silence, when wielded correctly, isn't weakness. It's strategy. And mine had worked. My phone buzzed once in my palm. A text from Lena. Can we talk? I think I made a mistake. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Then I locked it. No reply. No explanation. Some stories do not need a second telling. I reached into my blazer and pulled out a card newly printed, the edges crisp. Nicole Vance. Chief Global Officer. Avenex. 3 months ago, my name had been quietly erased from a frosted glass door. Now it was etched into the very framework of a company, built to outpace the one that dismissed me. I walked into the boardroom. Walnut table, leather folders. Executives from 3 continents seated in calm anticipation. Same contract. Same jets. Same billion-dollar weight. But this time, I wasn't in the room as support. I was leading it. Jonas smiled and slid the agreement toward me. Ready when you are. I looked down at the signature line. Beneath it, Nicole Vance. Oversight Executive. Full life cycle authority. This wasn't about a comeback. This was infrastructure. This was what happens when you survive erasure, and then become the name they cannot move forward without. I signed. Not for validation, not for applause, but because this time, I was writing the terms. And they were mine. As I left the building that evening, the August light poured down through the city skyline. I passed a line of glass windows where reflections shimmered like memory. This was the version of me they thought wouldn't last. The one they tried to replace with someone easier to name. They were wrong. And if you've ever been overlooked, replaced, erased by someone who never walked the road you paved, then you know what this moment feels like. If you've made it through that storm, I want you to remember this. You don't need to shout to win. You don't need to fight dirty to rise. Sometimes, the most powerful comeback is when you say nothing and sign everything. If this story reminded you of your own fight, drop a comment below, because your voice matters. And we're building a place where brilliance writes the script.